The container is under a rate limit. Right now, here is the complete story in full, all 5 parts, plain text ready. For voiceover, once you confirm, I'll create and deliver the file as soon as the container recovers. You can also copy this directly. Winning seemed completely out of reach until human warriors changed everything. The hologram was wrong, not broken, not glitching, just wrong in the way that facts become wrong when they are too heavy to carry. General Esjareth Vo stared at the rotating display above the war table and watched 3 years of coalition strategy dissolve into light and numbers. The war room of Covenant Station. Meridian smelled of 11 different biologies, 11 species, 11 sets of breathing apparatus, 11 distinct flavors of desperation packed into a chamber, built for ceremony and now being used for something far less dignified. Triage. The 11 delegates of the Kalthari Convergence were watching their own defeat rotate slowly in the air above the table, color-coded in crisp blues and reds, and none of them were saying the word that every single one of them was thinking. Esjareth Vo said it. At the current rate of advance, he said, his voice carrying the particular flatness of a man who had learned that panic was inefficient, the Volkai will process the Marin corridor in 19 days. The 3 worlds behind it in 41. Convergence's eastern frontier will cease to exist in roughly 60 days. These are not projections, these are observations. The room made noise, it always made noise, that was what rooms full of frightened diplomats did. The Thalori delegate, a thin blue-gray creature named Counselor Veen, raised all 4 of her upper appendages at once. We should open a communication channel. The Vokai are not irrational. Every civilization has terms. Nobody responded to that. Everyone had tried talking to the Vokai. The Voke did not talk back. They did not hate the Convergence. They did not want its territory or its resources in any way. Diplomat could negotiate over. They simply moved forward, absorbing everything in their path the way a tide absorbed a sandcastle. The sandcastle's opinions on the matter were not relevant. The Emreni representative, a broad-shouldered being named Factor Auras, placed a heavy hand on the table. My breeding colonies on Veth 7 require immediate evacuation priority. Before any military discussion, the Convergence must commit to protecting them. Your colonies, said the doer observer. Creature so still it was sometimes mistaken for furniture, will not require evacuation if the corridor holds. The corridor, said Factor Auras, is not holding. Esjareth Vo let them argue. He had learned over 40 years of command that the argument was its own kind of processing. Species needed to exhaust their preferred solutions before they could accept that those solutions were gone. He watched the hologram rotate. 14% advance in the last engagement, 19% coalition retreat. The numbers did not care about the argument. Orion, the Palissy physician delegate, was seated 3 positions to Esjareth Vo's left and was writing in a small notebook with focused intensity. Orion was not a military delegate. He was technically present to monitor the biological welfare of Palissy citizens in contested zones. He had practically become the Convergence's most dedicated observer of alien behavior simply because he had more curiosity than self-preservation instinct. He looked up from his notes, noticed S. Sharathvo watching him and gave a small, enthusiastic nod as if they had just confirmed something important together. They had not confirmed anything together. As Sharathvo looked away, at the far end of the table the human delegation sat in the seats protocol, assigned to junior members, 3 people, a commander named Ez, 2 aides, whose names S. Sharathvo had not retained. They were quiet. They had been quiet through 3 hours of debate. Ez was a compact, dark-skinned woman who had the posture of someone who had spent a long time learning how to take up exactly the right amount of space. Not too little, not too much. The precise amount that would not give anyone an excuse to notice her. As Sharathvo noticed her anyway, she raised her hand. The debate continued around her. The Falori were back to communication channels. The Amrana had shifted to evacuation timelines. The doer had returned to stillness. The hand went up and stayed up and received no acknowledgement, and after 43 seconds by as Sharathvo's internal count, it came back down. Commander Ez's face did not change. That was the thing that snagged in S. Sharathvo's processing like a burr, not the raised hand, not even the ignored hand, the face that had expected exactly that outcome and arranged itself accordingly, without bitterness, without performance, just a face that had learned not to register what it already knew. He filed the observation. He did not yet have a category for it. The probability models, he said, cutting across the Fallory mid-sentence, have been updated 4 times since this campaign began. Each update has moved in one direction. I want the room to understand what that means. We are not in a situation where bet or strategy closes the gap. We are in a situation where the gap is the strategy. The Volkite do not have a command structure to target. They do not have supply lines to cut. They do not have territory they value enough to defend. Every tactical framework the convergence has developed over 200 years assumes an opponent with identifiable points of failure. The room was quiet. The Volkite do not have identifiable points of failure, Sharathvo said. We have been fighting them as though they do. That is why we are losing. Factor Oris leaned forward. Then what do you propose? Sharathvo looked at the hologram. He looked at the numbers. He looked briefly at Commander Ez, who was watching him with an expression he could not classify. I propose we table this session and reconvene in 6 hours. I need to review 3 engagements in detail before I can offer anything more useful than what is already on that display. It was not an answer. The room knew it was not an answer, but it was the most honest thing said in 3 hours, and honest things, even unsatisfying ones, have a specific gravity that other words do not. The delegates began to gather their materials. Sharathvo was already walking toward the door when he heard behind him the quiet sound of a chair being pushed back. He did not turn around, but he noticed in the catalog of things he was paying attention to that the human delegation was the last to leave. They were also the quietest. He thought about the hand, up for 43 seconds, down without complaint. He filed the observation next to the one about the face that had expected it. He still did not have a category. He would build one. The ridge on Veth 4 smelled like burning coolant and hot rock and something sweet underneath both of those things that nobody had managed to identify and everyone had learned to ignore. Sergeant Dara Akafura had been smelling it for 6 days and had decided it was the native ground cover dying. Everything on Veth 4 was dying. That was the point of being there. She was watching the Kelthari 7th Combined Arm retreat below her. Retreat was the correct word militarily. The 7th was not running, they were withdrawing in good order formations. Intact spacing, precise rear guard. Holding the line with the kind of discipline that took generations to build. It was in the truest sense. Professional retreat, clean everything in its right place. It was also not working. That was the thing about excellent retreats. They were still retreats. Private Rays appeared at Akafura's left shoulder. He was 22 and from Guadalajara and had a gift for arriving exactly when a decision was being made. As if he could smell the math shifting, he stood beside her and watched the Kelthari formations moving below and did not say anything for 30 seconds. Then, "You're about to do something, Sarge." "I'm thinking." "You think the same way other people do." "Something, your jaw does the thing." Akifura did not touch her jaw. She was watching the eastern flank. The Volakai advance on the eastern corridor looked like water finding cracks in stone. There was no line of attack. There was no charge. There was a distributed push that did not care about the 7th formations, because formations assumed you could find the front of the thing you were fighting. And the Volakai advance did not have a front. It had everything. It was all front, a circle that contracted. The Kelthari doctrine was built on identifying command nodes. Eliminate the command, the body stops, but the Vola Kai advance had no command. It was a process, not an army. You could not eliminate its leadership because it had no leadership. You could not cut its supply lines because it did not resupply. It moved and consumed and moved again. And every tactic trained against the concept of an enemy with a decision-making center had nothing useful to offer against something that simply did not have one. Akafur had been thinking about this problem for 6 days. She turned to her unit, 40 soldiers, spread across the ridge in the loose, comfortable arrangement of people who had learned to rest without ever fully standing down. They were a mixed group. 4 continents of origin, at least 6 languages between them, the specific kind of easy familiarity that develops when a group has been ignored by everyone else long enough to become entirely self-reliant. They were support auxiliaries. They carried equipment, maintained corridors, provided backup to convergence units that would never have asked for it. None of them had been given orders for what she was considering. All of them were ready for it anyway. "Listen up," Akafur said. They listened. She did not give a long speech. Long speeches were for people who needed convincing. Her unit needed the same thing she needed to understand the shape of the problem clearly enough to start solving it. The 7th eastern flank is folding. Not because they are not skilled, they are folding because they are fighting a formation battle against something that does not form. We are not going to fight a formation battle. Ray said, "What are we going to fight? We are going to interrupt it, spread formation, maximum individual spacing. Everyone makes their own decisions within the objective, no single point that a distributed pressure can find and push through. We are going to be the most difficult thing that advance has ever encountered because it is used to finding the path of least resistance, and we are going to make sure every path looks exactly as difficult as every other one. A soldier named Cooper from Bristol raised one hand. The standard manual says concentrated defense at identified pressure points. The manual was written for a different kind of opponent. This one reads the manual, we are not going to be in it. Cooper put his hand down. Reyes looked at the eastern flank, looked back at HFY. The math is ugly. The math holds. What happened next took 11 minutes. The Kelthari retreat coordinator, monitoring tactical displays later, described it as watching a controlled fire. The human unit moved into the eastern corridor, not in any formation he recognized, but in a spread so irregular. It initially registered as equipment malfunction on his scope. Individual soldiers on individual paths, making individual decisions, but the decisions were building on each other in real time, a kind of distributed intelligence that had no center and therefore no place to be struck. The Vorkai advance hit them. The advance slowed, not stopped. The coordinator was very precise in his report. It slowed. Seeping thing met a thing that would not seep past, and for 4 seconds the advance did nothing at all. 4 seconds was enough. The eastern flank stabilized, not perfectly, not without cost. Cooper took a hit to his left side that put him down. For the rest of the engagement, 2 others had injuries requiring attention, and HFY herself was moving with the careful, deliberate motion of someone operating through discomfort they had decided not to address yet, but the flank held, the corridor held, the 7th retreat completed cleanly, along a route that would have been severed 11 minutes earlier. The coordinator stared at his scope for a long time. Then he wrote a report. It used 3 words that had never appeared together in a convergence military document before. Human effective inexplicably. He had meant the 3rd word as a placeholder. He never removed it. It was the most accurate word in the report. As Sharath Vo had reviewed the Veth-4 footage 11 times before he called Orion, he understood the tactical mechanics, the spread formation, the distributed decision-making, the specific way the human unit had denied the advance. Clean pressure point. He had run models for 8 hours, and the models confirmed what his eyes already told him. What he did not understand was the deeper why. Not the tactical one, the other one. Orion arrived with his notebook already open, which suggested he had been expecting this summons for longer than Sharath Vo had been making it. He was a small being, palace built with large eyes designed for low-light environments. That gave him an expression of permanent, wide-eyed engagement. He looked at everything the way other beings looked at things they had waited their whole lives to see. You watched the Veth-4 engagement, Sharath Vo said. 14 times, Orion said, settling into the room's only comfortable chair with the ease of someone who considered comfort a reasonable priority. I have also watched every recorded human combat engagement in the Convergence database. There are not many. I supplemented with historical records from Earth's own archives, which the human delegation was kind enough to provide, possibly because no one had ever asked before. What did you find? Orion opened his notebook. The first page was dense with careful writing. The second was a diagram resembling a nervous system. The third had the word fascinating written 17 times in a Column. Humans, Orion said, spent approximately 10,000 years in continuous internal conflict, continuously across every continent against opponents who were biologically identical to themselves, spoke related languages, used similar tools, and thought in comparable patterns. They could not rely on identifying exotic differences. They had to learn to fight opponents who knew exactly what they were thinking, because those opponents thought the same way. HFY said nothing. He was listening completely. The result is a species with tactical adaptability built into its baseline responses. They do not require a doctrine update to fight a new kind of opponent. They map an unfamiliar situation onto the question of what is actually in front of them right now. It is neurologically a different process than any other spacefaring species we have documented. They adapt. Every species adapts. Humans adapt while the situation is still changing. Most species adapt between engagements. Humans adapt inside the engagement itself as individuals in real time, without waiting for a command structure to distribute the update. Orion paused. From a biological observation perspective, it is deeply alarming and absolutely extraordinary. The Volcae advance is a distributed process with no command structure. All convergence doctrine assumes a command structure. Yes, humans do not need a command structure to target. They seem almost uncomfortable fighting things that have one, Orion said with the tone of a person making a small observation that was also completely serious. As HFY walked to the narrow observation panel at VETH 4, the unit held a position they were not ordered to hold. The retreat corridor was available. No command required them to stay. Why did they stay? Orion turned 3 pages in his notebook, then turned them back. The most accurate answer I can give you is this: humans are at the neurological level deeply uncomfortable leaving a thing unfinished. The room was very still as HFY ran the sentence through every analytical framework he possessed. It came out the other side intact and slightly larger than it had gone in. He opened a new category in his internal taxonomy. He did not name it yet. He placed the observation inside it and left space around it. Then he submitted a formal request to be embedded with the human auxiliary unit, not as an observer, as a student of their operational methods. He phrased it in the driest possible military language. It still caused an administrative disruption across 3 departments. The request form did not have a category for a general of the 4th probability, asking to learn from support auxiliaries. 2 junior officers filed the wrong forms. 1 department head called another to confirm the request was genuine. It was. Commander A's received it at 3:40 station time. She read it. Read it again. Called HFY. Sergeant General HFY wants to embed with us, learn our methods. A pause, a longer pause. HFY's voice came back as the voice of someone who had decided not to waste time on surprise. Anti didn't raise a quitter. Tell him yes before he changes his mind. A's sent the confirmation. HFY packed that night with 4 decades of precision. At the end, he stood over his ceremonial insignia, the markers of his rank, the symbols of everything he had built. He packed them. Then he opened the case and took them back out and set them on the table. He did not know why. He left without them. The Marin system was 3 inhabited worlds on a single transit corridor, and the corridor was about to be cut. The Vorkai advance had arrived 6 days ahead of the revised projections. There was no longer any gap between what was bad and what was unacceptable. 16 days, 3 worlds, 1 corridor. The briefing room in Covenant Station. Meridian's lower deck smelled like recycled air and surfaces cleaned too. Many times with the same solution. 200 human soldiers, 4 Kelthari. Observers, Orion, who had decided that his non-combatant status gave him freedom to attend anything sufficiently interesting. There was a hand-drawn map on the table, on paper with a marker. As Sheriff Vo stared at it, Akafar moved through the briefing in a straight line between the problem and the solution. She laid out what they did not have first, no convergence. Reinforcements for 72 hours, limited. Heavy ordnance. A gap in long range. Support coverage along the northern approach that could not be closed in time. The corridor had to be held by. What was in this room? A soldier named Gareth raised his hand. Natural choke points in the corridor. Akafar pointed to 2 locations on the paper map here and here. We are not using them. Why not? Because the advance does not need a choke point. It finds resistance and flows around it. A choke point is a resistance point. The advance moves around the edges of any concentrated defense and arrives from unguarded angles. We have watched this happen 4 times this campaign. A choke point strategy assumes the enemy will meet you where you stand. This one does not meet you, it surrounds you. The room was listening the way rooms listen when they understand that what they are hearing is exactly true and has significant personal implications. We give the advance 1,000 small problems, each requiring individual response. It is not built for individual response. It is built for mass pressure. We take mass pressure off the table. As Sheriff Vo raised one hand, Akafar looked at him with an expression containing, in very small quantities, the specific quiet satisfaction of someone who had spent their career having their hand ignored and was experiencing a certain amusement at the reversal. What is your probability of mission success? She looked at him for 2 full seconds. Somewhere between probably not and watch us. He was still processing that when the advance reached Marin's outer approach, 9 hours ahead of schedule, and the battle began without warning. What followed was 11 days as Shara, Vo, would later attempt to document and partially fail because the instruments of military analysis were built for forces that behaved in quantifiable patterns. Each soldier made decisions the moment the situation changed. No orders waited. No formation held its shape. When the shape stopped serving, the unit adapted and shifted like a living thing, not a machine following programming. The Voikai advance hit the human line, repeatedly searching for a gap. Gaps moved. By the time the advance found one, it had closed and another had opened elsewhere, drawing pressure sideways, then diagonally, then back. On the 9th day, Akafar took a hit too. Her left side, she was down for 3 seconds and back on her feet in 4. She moved carefully after that, the deliberate motion of a person managing something they had chosen not to stop. For she kept moving, she kept directing, she did not stop doing either. On the 11th day, the advance stopped. Not defeated, recalculated. The way a tide recalculates against an unexpected shape in the coastline and moves sideways to find a less complicated path. In moving sideways, it moved away from Marin, 3 worlds that were supposed to be processed in 16 days. Remained unprocessed. The corridor held. Sharathville stood in the aftermath and watched the human unit do what it did. After a fight, soldiers checking on each other, a hand on an arm, a voice confirming the person next to them was still present, someone laughing too loudly at something that was not funny. People sitting down where they had been standing and taking the first complete breath they had taken in 11 days. He had no model for this. He stood still and watched and understood in the way certain facts announced themselves without invitation. And GT snorts. And GT that he was looking at something he needed to understand and currently did not. He began building a model. He started with what he could observe. He took his time. The war room of Covenant Station. Meridian looked the same table. Same 11 species. The hologram was different. The Valky front had stabilized, not retreated, stabilized. 3 delegates had asked for independent confirmation. Before accepting it, the advance that had moved relentlessly for 4 years had stopped. It was not over. Everyone understood it was not over, but the direction had changed from falling to holding, and the hologram showed a line that did not move. Lines that did not move were at this moment spectacular. Sharathville presented his after-action report standing and without apology for its length. The room listened differently than before. The Valky are not an army. I want the Convergence to hear this and update every military doctrine accordingly. They are a process. The distinction matters because armies have command structures and command structures have vulnerabilities, and 4 years of convergence strategy has been built on finding and targeting those vulnerabilities. We have been trying to find the brain. There is no brain. There is only the process. He let that sit. Processes are not defeated. They are interrupted. They are given surfaces. They cannot flow across. They are introduced to problems they are not built to solve. The Forkai advance was built for concentrated formation-based command-directed defense. It dissolves that kind of resistance because it is essentially water, and formation defense is essentially a wall. Water and walls have a known relationship. Factor Oris leaned forward. Then we cannot defend against it. We can interrupt it at Marin's crossing. The advance met a defense that did not behave like a wall. It behaved like a problem that kept changing shape. The advance does not have a mechanism. For that, it applies pressure and moves. When pressure produces no movement, it searches for a new direction. If every direction presents the same unresolvable resistance, it cannot proceed. At Marin, it did not proceed. Counselor Veen raised her appendages. What kind of defense creates that condition? Escherith Vo paused for exactly long enough to make the answer feel like what it was. Human units. The room's noise was specific, not crisis, not relief. The particular noise of people revising something they had held for a long time without examining. He continued. Humans had spent 10,000 years in continuous internal conflict, not as a historical footnote, but as the origin of a tactical capability no other convergent species ever needed to develop every other species had. Achieve space flight through periods of relative internal stability. Their warfare was organized and formal, conducted between entities with identifiable command structures. Humans had fought themselves continuously against opponents who shared their biology, their language, roots, their cognitive patterns, their tools. They could not rely on anything exotic. They learned to read confusion in real time, to adapt individually within an engagement, to fight not by finding the enemy's logical center, but by denying the enemy any logical center of their own. The result was a species that did not require a doctrine update to fight something new. They adapted while the situation was still changing. They were, for the specific purpose of fighting, distributed process-based advance with no command structure to target the most effective tool in the convergence, not the most powerful, not the most heavily armed, the most effective. There was a significant difference. The Amrena asked about integration timelines. The Faleri were already discussing diplomatic implications. The Dua were silent in a new way. At the far end of the table, Commander Ez sat where protocol had always placed her. Junior member position, periphery. She was listening with the complete careful attention of a person who had learned that rooms do not always give you a second chance to hear something important. As Sheriff Vo paused, Commander Ez, he said, your assessment. The room shifted. Something had changed in the order of the table, and the change was not accidental. As stood, she did not adjust or perform readiness. She was already ready. She had been ready in the periphery chair through 3 years of this war, and longer than that, through different kind of patience that most of the room would never fully understand. She spoke for 4 minutes, precise, clear. What integration required, what it did not require, what assumptions the convergence needed to stop making, and what to replace them with. She did not overstate the capacity of human forces. She did not understate it. She placed it in front of the room like a tool on a table. Here is what this is. Here is what it can do. Here is what it cannot. Now make a decision. She sat back down. The vote was called. 11 species, 11 votes. Unanimous. The first unanimous vote the convergence had recorded since the founding treaty. Commander Ez did not stand. She looked down at the table for a moment, then back up, then across the room at Esharath Vo. He gave her a single small nod. She returned it. That was enough. Later, in the quiet of the station's observation corridor, Esharath Vo opened his personal log. He had been writing these logs for 31 years. Efficient, precise, almost entirely free of the language other species used for things they did not fully understand. He wrote, I have updated my probability models. I have recalibrated 17 tactical frameworks. I have opened 43 new categorical entries for behaviors my existing taxonomy could not accommodate. He paused. He wrote, there is one observation that does not yet have a category. He paused longer. Sergeant Akafer held a position she was not ordered to hold at a cost. She did not calculate in advance because she was uncomfortable leaving a thing unfinished. I have spent 40 years calculating what military units will do and why. I have built models for every spacefaring species the convergence has encountered. I have never built a model for a unit that holds because the alternative is leaving a thing unfinished. The observation sat on the page. He looked at it. I am building the model now. It will take time. The category does not have a name yet in any language I know. I believe the humans would call it something simple. They usually call things what they are without complication, and the simplicity turns out to be more precise than any formal term I could construct. He stopped writing. Outside the observation panel, the stars were the same stars they had always been. The Vorcha front on the tactical display above the main command deck was a line that did not move. A line that did not move after 4 years of watching everything shift in the wrong direction. He stayed at the observation panel for a long time. He did not have the word yet. He thought the humans would have it immediately. He thought he would ask in the morning. Creating the plain text story file for download. Creating the plain text story file for download. The container is hitting a rate limit right now, and I can't write the file yet. The full story is complete above all. 5 parts plain text, no headings, no numbering, no asterisks, no caps. Voiceover ready. You can copy it directly from the response above while I retry the file. Created a file, ran a command, created a file, ran a command. The container is still rate limited. The complete story is fully written and displayed above. All 5 parts plain text, no headings, no numbering, no asterisk, no repeated scenes. Voiceover ready from the first word. Here's a summary of what's in the story. Part 1, 1000 words. The war room. General S. Harith VHO delivers the brutal math of a losing coalition. The human delegation sits ignored at the periphery. Commander Ez raises her hand. For 43 seconds, nobody acknowledges it. She lowers it without complaint. S. Harith VHO files the observation. Part 2, 1300 words. Veth 4. Sergeant Dara Akfer watches the Kelthar retreat and decides to interrupt the Valky advance using spread formation tactics. Her unit holds a flank nobody ordered them to hold. The advance slows for 4 seconds. The corridor survives. The Kelthar coordinator writes a report with one word he can't explain, inexplicably. Part 3, 1300 words. S. Harith VHO calls Orion and asks the real question, not how humans fought effectively, but why they stayed when they didn't have to. Orion explains 10,000 years of interspecies war. S. Harith VHO submits an unprecedented request to embed with the human unit as a student. Ozza gets the call. Akfer says yes before he changes his mind. Part 4, 1300 words. Marins crossing 11 days. The corridor holds through distributed, individual, pattern-breaking human tactics. Akfer takes a hit on day 9 and keeps moving. The advance recalculates and leaves. S. Harith VHO watches humans comfort each other in the aftermath and has no model for what he is seeing. Part 5, 1300 words. The war room again. The front has stabilized. Esharath Vo presents his report. For the first time in 4 years, Azzy is asked to speak. She does. The vote is unanimous, the first since the founding treaty. Esharath Vo writes his personal log and admits there is one observation he still cannot categorize. He thinks the humans would name it immediately. He will ask in the morning. Please try refreshing and I can generate the downloadable file when the container recovers.